Hello there, my friends. Chris Marcus here with you on behalf of the StockPulse Network on Wednesday, October 10th. And really excited to have a new guest on the show, Vin Maru, who is a cannabis entrepreneur, editor-in-chief for investinmj.com, and also creating a media company called Golden Tech Media, which develops and manages related media assets and helps people understand what's going on in the cannabis industry. He's got a lot of experience there and relationships that he uses to leverage to help his clients make wise decisions and understand what's going on. And certainly with the cannabis market catching a lot of attention as it's growing, it's great to have you on here today, Vin, and thanks for making some time. How are you today, my friend? And how is everything going up in Canada today?
Great. No, thank you, Chris, for having me on this podcast. And Canada is a week away from legalization in terms of recreational cannabis. So it's been a long time coming. They were expecting to do this back in the summer, but being governments the way they are, they delay things quite often. But we're finally here, and it's really an exciting time to be a participant in the cannabis space. It's been going on since I got involved in 2013, when I realized that Canada was going to start legalizing cannabis and creating a corporate environment around it and commercializing the industry. So that's when I really started changing my focus away from precious metals and other investment opportunities, and kind of dedicated most of my time to the cannabis sector itself.
Yeah, it's certainly, and down here in the U.S., Casey Research and some of the other newsletters have been focusing a lot more on the cannabis industry. I'm here in Denver, so certainly it's been interesting to see just a lot of the business infrastructure that's built up, and obviously with all of the political implications, not always the most straightforward market. So for folks who have been hearing about some of these things, maybe are looking for ways to get involved, I was hoping maybe you could provide a little bit of an overview of where the market is at, especially in Canada, and where might people be looking for good opportunities, or just how to get started in evaluating what's going on.
Sure. Well, Canada, when we first realized that they were going to commercialize the industry, I always kind of said the first company that goes pubco and has the backing by the bankers are going to be the ones that succeed, or the biggest company in the space. And sure enough, Tweed, which is now Canopy Growth Corporation, they were the first ones to go public, had a lot of backing, and I mean the market cap is into many, many billions. I haven't even checked the latest one, but I think they had a $60 share price. And when I first realized who they were and they were going public, I remember the share price was, the first offering that I saw was under $1. And, when the stock started trading as $1.20, $1.50, and now it's at $60. So it's an interesting run up that we've had. There are quite a few companies that have significant market caps, $1 billion plus market caps. And had you looked at these companies 2 years ago, they were $100 million market cap or less, even for many of them.
Right.
One of the companies that I got involved in early enough and looked at was Green Organic Dutchman. And, they did their first public offering at 50 cents. The stock's trading $6.50, $7 right now. Had gone to a high of almost 10. But, so what I'm seeing out there in terms of these companies in Canada in particular is the leaders have probably been established. They've gotten the backing by the financial community, the regulatory, the government. And they've built the foundation. And if you had to pick, let's say, the top 10 or 20 of them, they're the leaders that are going to kind of continue forward. Now, I know in the industry, and Bruce Litton from Canopy had mentioned it a while ago, but I've been saying this for years with people that I speak to in the financial space in cannabis, and we always knew that there was going to be this run up of all the stocks, and we've seen that happen over the last few years. But at some point, the market is going to realize that most of these companies are not going to make any money, not any significant amount of money over the next few years to justify the valuations and the multiples they have right now. Because if you look at some of these companies, they're trading at 100, 200 times earnings. And we've gone through dot-com bubbles and tech bubbles and, resource bubbles and all of the real estate. I've never seen, maybe outside of crypto, I've never seen anything in terms of a ridiculously high valuation and multiple for companies. But that was going to be a kind of the nature of the cannabis space, because if you look at almost every industry and sector out there, you have there was not many new industries or emerging markets to invest in. Cryptos was one of them. Cannabis is a brand new emerging market that's, going from this, call it the illegal gray market, to a legal market. But you have everything that has to get built out in this space. So even though we've seen these ridiculous run-ups in the stock prices and where they go from here, I've got some ideas and thoughts on that, which we can maybe discuss. But we have this whole industry that's going from a gray market to a legal market, and it's not just cultivation. There's so many verticals and ancillary businesses that are established, getting established, or will still have to be established. And so when we look at the cannabis, I was speaking at a conference in LA this past weekend, and we all come to an agreement, and the people that are in this space understand that we're still early stages. I mean, if you have to take if you allude it to a baseball game, we're probably in the first inning of
Right.
where the cannabis sector is going. But that's not to say these large corporations in Canada who have these high valuations, whether they continue to go higher or not, or there's a severe correction coming, that's still to, that market will play itself out over the next year. But I still believe there's a lot of opportunities in entering the market, whether it's as an investor in stocks or an entrepreneur starting up a business. I think there's tons of opportunities still ahead of us, and building these brand name companies and markets, or a marketable company or product or service. I think that's where this is all going. And then you have to look at all these ancillary and verticals in the space. So I even though you could say the easy money has been made in Canada in terms of the licensed producers, the ancillary and the business opportunities, there's so many out there that there's a lot of money that still can be made in the space.
Yeah, a lot of interesting points you raised there. Again, certainly when I came to Denver, one of the things I found interesting is that, yes, you have the dispensaries and the growers, yet the trade shows that are coming through and just the variety of different products involved around that, I found fascinating. And like you mentioned, I think there are a lot of opportunities for entrepreneurs who are looking to start a business. And especially you touched on how if you have a good business team and marketing and all these things in place, you can create a lot of opportunity. Certainly, as you also touched on, when you have any of these markets similar to whether it was .com or some of the things in the cryptos where there's an idea that has a lot of value, but a lot of things pop up that, fit the pets.com parameters. So, and especially also, again, as you touched on with the run-ups, we saw that with Tilray. And from an investment standpoint, there's the premise that something can be a good idea. And then there's also the idea, well, are these individual companies going to make money? And at some point, if you bid the price up high enough, whether we know exactly what a fair value is or not, there's theoretically some fair value. And so it sounds like some of these companies may be getting a little bit ahead in pricing, but you perhaps like some of the entrepreneurial opportunities in addition to that as well?
Absolutely. So I'm going to touch a bit on, not in terms of actual valuations, but where I think we are right now in terms of the investment opportunities in the publicly traded companies, where why there could be some downside risk, but then also why there could be some upside risks of both of it, and how you weigh that out. I mean, I leave that up to the individual investor. But yeah, in Canada, we've seen significant rise in the stock prices and the valuations. But I said several years ago, the investment into the sector is going to come in different waves. So initially, you had the investments come in from the accredited investors, small boutique brokers, that sort of thing. Then you've got major brokerage financial firms, fund managers that are specific to cannabis putting capital to work. And that's what we've seen over the last few years. Now, I mean, this is Canada specific, so US will have its own time frame in terms of stock price movements and valuations. But in Canada, you know, we've had the summer lows come in this past summer, and it seems as precious metals has a seasonality to investing, I believe there's a seasonality to cannabis space, which is pretty much the same seasonality that we saw in precious metals or markets in general, which is, you know, you buy the summer lows when no one's paying attention, you sell early fall, then you get a bit of a sell-off in Christmas, and then it runs up early spring or winter, and then, you know, sell in May, go away, come back to Labor Day type of scenarios. I think that holds true to cannabis as well. But one thing that's happened in Canada is, I mean, yeah, we've had great run-ups in the stocks over the last while, even back to this September, where if you bought it in the summer and you sold early September, yeah, most of these stocks has risen 50 to 100%. But usually markets are forward thinking, as we probably know. And I look at the space now and I'm just thinking, well, we have legalization coming in less than a week. So October 17th. So how much of that is baked into the cake? Like where's the new news? Where's the new upside? When you have legalization happening after the 17th, great. We know it's here. You know, how much of that is determined into the stock price? So what I suspect will happen is you'll have this trend, you know, legalization will come, the stocks will stay where they are. There might be a bit of a sell-off. And then come to, you know, you see a quarter or two of earnings, come to realize, yeah, these companies aren't making money to justify the valuation. But what I have not seen, and I do suspect is coming into the market, is once you have the regulatory framework and the legal framework in Canada legalizing cannabis for recreational, then what we'll have and we'll probably see is some of the big institutional money now stepping into the sector where maybe they weren't allowed to invest because it had been illegal. They're going to look at it. You're starting to hear some of the banks and, you know, pension fund monies, sovereign wealth funds, banking money, all of that money has not come into the sector. So whether they buy into the sector right now at these ridiculously high valuations, I think these guys are very sophisticated and smart. So they'll probably either wait for a correction or make the correction happen to bring it down to a valuation where they think they'd like to enter the market. But one thing I do know, as we start to, you know, have not just Canada, but a global legalized market, all of those big money is still got to come into the sector at some point, whether they come in now at these prices or they wait till the price corrects, you know, 50, 60% and then scoop them up. You know, that's their investment strategies. I would think it's the latter, but that money still has to come in. So yeah, I kind of believe over the next year, we're just entering a sideways trading pattern. I don't see you know, could we correct 40, 50%? Sure. But does 40, 50% in context of where the stocks were 2 or 3 years ago, which was, you know, 4 or 5 times the price less than where they are right now. Yeah, you know, it's all relative at that point. When I was looking at most of these licensed producers 3, 4 years ago, you know, they were lucky to get their license in hand. The valuations at that time were only, you know, 25, maybe 30 million. And we thought they were rich then. But being the markets the way they are, I mean, now we're seeing, you know, $100 million, $200 million just for the smaller pub goes that are out there licensed. But some of the big name guys out there, you know, yeah, they've gotten half a billion to billions of dollars. And I don't see that changing significantly anytime soon.
Right, right. One issue I've been wondering if has been addressed by the industry yet. When I got here, I know there was a challenge for a lot of these operations because they couldn't deposit their revenue into a Federal Reserve insured bank. What's been
Mhm.
going on with that? Does that same issue exist? Obviously, there's much different political and regulatory code in Canada, but what are these companies doing? Has someone figured out a solution to that? And if you could comment on the U.S. and in Canada.
Yeah, I mean, even in Canada, banking for the licensed producers are actually plant growing, still kind of an issue. Now, BMO was looking at making some investments in the space, so I think they're going to be one of the first banks to probably allow it. But talking to some of the licensed producers, they're actually using credit unions here to do all their business
Right.
transactions. Now, one thing that is allowed is, ironically, is that you can, as a medical patient, up until now, you could buy your product or your medicine from the licensed producers using a credit card. So that was always good in a way. But I suspect with legalization happening in a week or two that the banks probably will not be adverse to allow banking now with cannabis companies unless they have some moral objection to cannabis, which some banks obviously do. In the States, it's still a contention with the industry. I heard in California, the State Bank of California was going to try to entertain cannabis companies and accepting deposits and having an account with them, but that's got squashed until the U.S. government, the federal government, actually deschedules it and legalizes cannabis. Banking is always going to be an issue. Payment is going to be an issue, which means you're going to have to deal with more security issues around the cash nature of the industry and having more security, which is probably why you have armed personnel at dispensaries, because you got a lot of cash there. Whereas, Canada, it's all been shipped out from the licensed producers. And once we have the retail stores opening up, I don't think we'll have as much of a security issue, because at least in some form or other, we have the ability to use the banking system.
Yes, which certainly I would imagine helps make things easier for these businesses. Although along those lines, what is your take on, I hear some people say it's just a matter of time before the United States has a full legalization policy. I'm actually from New Jersey, so I hear from folks back there that it's eventually hitting New Jersey is going to be legalized. Is that a matter of time in your opinion, and it is heading that way? Or obviously deciphering American politics is more of a art than logical science by any means, but where does that stand if it's in terms of further legalization?
Well, I would tend to think that as more states legalize medically and then more come online for recreational, we got more than 50% of the states already in the medical side of it. At some point or another, the US government is going to have to address cannabis. It's really sad to see that the politicians in the US, like Jeff Sessions, has his personal view of what he thinks cannabis is, and for him to have that much control and influence over legalizing or not legalizing cannabis really astounds me. When you see the majority of the population wants legalizations, it's the endless amounts of money and resources that are spent keeping it illegal. I mean, I really just kind of shake my head and look at the U.S. government and say, you guys were the first
You're not
ones
alone on that one.
Yeah. Well, here's the irony of the situation. I made a mention of it in LA, and I'm sure the other people in the cannabis space that were American may not have appreciated, but I did get a bit of an applause for making the comment. And I'm not one to hold back on certain things. So here's my contention with the whole U.S. government is it was the U.S. that made it illegal in the first place. Then every other country around the world pretty much had to follow suit and in line with the U.S. policy. So now everyone around the world has taken cannabis off the table, and hemp for that matter, which is a shame in terms of an ecological damage it's done, removing hemp from the ecosystem. But now the irony of the situation is that everyone is looking to the US and the US government to legalize it so that way we can have a globalized cannabis market. And I'm just thinking, the last country in the world that I want to see legalized and take control of the cannabis industry is the very same country that made it illegal and penalized everyone in the first place. Yeah. So, it's a bit of a political rant, and I don't like to get into politics, especially in a public venue. But I think as a moral person, or as humanity, everyone has to look at the reality of the situation and realize that, yes, it was the US that led the anti-cannabis or the anti-drug war. So why should they be the first ones to benefit from legalization and collect all these tax dollars when they spent all the tax dollars to fight it in the first place? And let alone the fact that one of their departments has as a patent on cannabis and cannabinoids and its various use. And I'm not a patent guy, but I mean, I just find it ironic that everyone's turning to the US to look for some guidance in legalization in terms of an opportunity where I would just say, screw the US. Every other country, move ahead and move ahead fast. Build out your own cannabis market, and that way you can build out your own country economy, or not build out an economy, but build out your own cannabis industry within your country to help the citizens of that country. I mean, Canada, for example, is exporting cannabis now around the world, especially into Europe, Australia, and some of the Central American countries. And I think that trend is going to continue. Canadian companies will be the leaders in this space, but in an ideal world, I mean, cannabis, if you grow it indoors or outdoors, can be grown in most microclimates. So why would any one country want to bring in export or imports from other countries when once you get the right resources and the knowledge base, you can grow the stuff on your own significantly cheaper than importing it in from the licensed producers. So it's a bit of a dichotomy because I get invested in these licensed producers. I talk about the investment opportunities in this space. But one thing that I'm happy that Canada has done is that come October 17th, every household in Canada will be allowed to grow 4 plants. So yeah, you have a commercial market and, people like branded products, but at the end of the day, if everyone has the ability and the right to grow their own medicines or whatever cannabis for their own use, I would encourage that significantly.
Which makes sense, and I couldn't agree more about the American politics. I apologize. Sorry for that.
No,
I mean,
I tell Americans, don't take things personally. I love all of the people that I've met along the years, and Americans and the citizens in general. It's just when you mix the politics and the government's side of it into it, it's almost like you have to separate the two.
Yeah, and certainly when the world's looking to the American political system to regulate any sort of industry, usually doesn't end up so ideal, which again is why it's great to have you on here and let people know about investinmj.com and Golden Tech Media, because the other half of any time government gets involved is that there are usually distortions created in the market, and it's nice that we have folks like you who are out analyzing those so that people can find the good opportunities. Along those lines, another thing I noticed in one of your articles you mentioned is that blockchain is now getting involved in the cannabis industry. And I was wondering if you could comment on how that's happening and where that's being applied. Certainly another interesting, exciting market these days, even if it's been a little bit quiet. But how is blockchain getting involved now?
Well, there's a lot of startups, obviously, that are blockchain related in terms of it. I was speaking at the Grow Up conference this past summer, and the whole presentation was on crypto cannabis and how I saw tokenization in the cannabis space as well as blockchain technologies. So first, I don't think many of these tokens, whether they're a utility token or payment token or whatever, that are out there catering towards the cannabis space, I don't think they're viable in terms of investments, because they could be a dime a dozen. How do you capture a whole market with all of these? But IBM did put out a white paper and suggesting, it was a small white paper. I briefly read it over and used it, part of some of the content for my presentation. But they were talking to BC and the government there, and how blockchain can be used within the industry in terms of seed to sale tracking and using it. So, someone like yourself and anyone who's familiar with blockchain technology, I'm not going to get into the technology side of it, but whether our belief in a particular cryptocurrency or a token has any value, there's no disputing the fact that the architecture and the technology behind blockchain and the distributed ledger, very, very significant in all markets, and cannabis will be no different. So how blockchain is used and who the leaders are, I think that's, for the cannabis sector, I think it is going to be determined over the coming years. But it is something that is very much on my radar, because I do believe in the technology, and it's the next evolution of the internet, if you want to call it that, and how it gets incorporated into the space to be determined. There was a software company who's probably one of the biggest seed to sale software companies in Canada, and I was speaking with Jonathan about it, and I brought up the whole idea of blockchain and how it could be used in the cannabis space. And his thoughts were, it'll be tough for them to enter the space and bring in blockchain, just because the governments don't even have any sort of idea of what blockchain or are using it to any level of degree. And cannabis is a very highly controlled, regulated market. I mean, compliance is a big thing. So I think that for that technology to be adopted in cannabis, it's really in the sector is really premature, because the whole industry is really early stages in terms of compliance and regulation. These are all just being developed, let alone to try to bring all of these rules and regulations, compliance, the framework, to try to bring that to a blockchain technology. I think that's going to be cannabis 2.0 later on down the road. I think the way the systems have been built out over the decades and years, using the existing technology is what's got to be done first for the cannabis space. Right. Then we'll start bringing those layers of blockchain on top of it, or migrating from the existing environment to a blockchain environment. But absolutely, I am all for the technology. I actually own a domain called cannabisinternet.com, and my thought would have been, there's going to be lots of companies coming out with individual blockchain solutions and cryptos around the cannabis, and they'll all have their own use cases in terms of the architecture and what it's built on, but the use case for the need of that individual blockchain. But me as a consumer or an individual, I don't want to have myself registered with 20 different cryptos or blockchain technologies and user IDs just for the cannabis space alone, let alone all the other blockchains. So my thought would have been is, if we're going to have cannabis sector and the blockchain used as part of it, then you really almost have to have one point of on-ramp, like I call it the highway, I don't know, but you have a highway where every blockchain, whether it's based on EOS or Ethereum or whatever, Bitcoin or whatever blockchain technologies or on ones that are undiscovered yet, if those are all going to come out on those individual platforms, and everyone's going to try to compete. No one leader is going to be established right away, but eventually you do get leaders established, and that's what the market accepts and adopts. But my thought would have been is, if you have this one on-ramp, I call it onto a highway, where maybe all the individual user IDs and token, your own individual token on those blockchains are used, at least it's one point where everyone can amalgamate it, and then to bring a business onto that platform, whether you're a cannabis dispensary or you're in the security side or you're making edibles, it almost makes sense that it's on one architecture platform or highway. And that's what I kind of envisioned with the cannabisinternet.com, a domain I own. to be. Now, how that materializes and the technology behind it, it's a little beyond me, but eventually I think people will kind of come to understand that maybe this is kind of a route that we should look at, and people will accept it and pick it up, and kind of we move forward with it.
Yes, and certainly sounds like an interesting niche for the entrepreneurs to be involved in, who can find some applications and solutions there. And last question along the lines of cryptos. I know you have a background in cryptos and precious metals. And before we let you run today, just any thoughts on where the crypto market stands, whether you think this is a time to be getting invested? Obviously, with the prices down, there's lots of folks saying that it's a bubble and the technology is not valid. Similar with precious metals, in many cases below the cost of production now. So curious any thoughts you have on cryptos and gold and silver.
Sure. I've, in terms of cryptos, I've seen markets start and peak out, and it's usually a 10-year window. So if we had cryptos and Bitcoin come out in 2018 or 2008, we're at a 10-year mark. We've had a run up. Everyone is now at least aware of cryptocurrencies. Now, whether they've adopted them or not, I mean, we probably have 1 or 2% of the population. I don't even think that much that actually owns any cryptocurrencies.
Right.
I kind of believe that we're just going to enter a stagnant period over the next few years, where you have these the currencies themselves, the cryptocurrencies, are probably not going to go nowhere, and they probably will actually continue to decrease until you get adoption of using those currencies either as a payment method or whatever. Until you actually get significant use cases of the currencies, I don't see them going anywhere anytime soon. And then let alone the fact that you've got hundreds and hundreds of them out there, and everyone trying to raise, doing a token sale based on the utility now. They can't really call it a currency or investment. But in terms of the technology that's behind there, we talked about the blockchain and the architecture. I think in the background, all of that is going to be continuously developed out over the coming years. You're going to stabilize platforms, build, get adoption onto those platforms. And when that starts to happen, then we may start to see kind of this whole resurgence of the crypto market, whether it's a currency or token or a blockchain. But the cat's out of the bag. We all know cryptos are out there. The tokens, I think there's not much value in investing in them right now until you actually have adoption and they become mainstream in use of a particular use case. So, for example, if everyone, I'm going to go back to the cannabis thing, is if everyone has this blockchain technology architecture and companies that are in the cannabis industry are migrating towards accepting and adopting blockchain technologies, then you'll have the cryptocurrencies in that space being used. Well, 1 or 2 of those currencies will eventually emerge as the leader, and it's probably who's got the biggest marketing dollar to build out their crypto brand. Then I think you get this resurgence back, and that can kind of relate to every other cryptocurrency out there and every other niche or vertical. So yeah, I think we're just at this point right now where we'll probably end up languishing. Sector may not go anywhere for the next few years until you actually get people using the technology more as a mainstream thing. But, I'm bullish on it longer term. I'm sure the whole blockchain, the architecture behind that technology, it is the next evolution of the internet. It just takes a while for people to start adopting and using it, and then validating it and understanding why it's so much superior to everything that we have right now. Especially with, and I mean, I think part of it is also these smart contracts that you start seeing, whether they're Ethereum based or EOS based or any of these other parts. I mean, I really start to think that's where a lot of the B2B side or the B2C side of the world will go, and businesses are going to have to revamp their business model to make sure they start incorporating the blockchain technology and smart contracts, which is great because now it's hard to dispute those contracts, or it's all automated, and AI is another thing. We kind of touched on. I think artificial intelligence moving forward is going to be a big industry too. But in terms of the double-edged sword in life is that as we move towards blockchain and cryptos and smart contracts being adopted more and more mainstream, those technologies are, sadly enough and ironically enough, are going to displace employment from other people all around in all sectors. So you'll start to see people like in the insurance industry, governments hopefully these jobs will essentially be useless, or will be naturally diminished, or the number of them, because you have the artificial intelligence and the blockchain and smart contracts controlling and managing many aspects of business and consumers. So it's one of those things, I'm happy that the technology is moving forward and the blockchain will move forward, and it will, but it will displace a lot of traditional employment opportunities and businesses. And that's something the world's going to have to move forward, just like robotics will probably displace a lot of the manufacturing employees out there. So, as much as the government wants to bring in industrial manufacturing back to North America, I don't think the jobs are going to be there, more so because I think companies will leverage robotics and artificial intelligence and automate it more so, because cost of labor is just phenomenal. So yeah. Oh, in terms of precious metals, I think that was the last thing.
Yep.
I was kind of I've been writing about precious metals, focused on it for a long time, stopped focusing on it around 2012, 2013, until you actually get a major catalyst to migrate, or a lack of confidence in the fiat current system, and a lack of confidence in governments all around the world, or at least other countries which are moving away from the US dollar and moving maybe towards the petro-yuan or cryptos and stuff, until you get these countries just saying enough is enough, or mass population saying enough of the corruption, that's when I can see precious metals take off again. But the fact is, the cash cost to produce an ounce of gold or silver is what it's selling at right now. So most of these producers out there, they're producing just to break even, maybe even some at a loss, or they get buy credits of mining from copper or zinc, and they get silver buy credits so it's cheap that way. But there's no other industry I see out there, and it's a heavy manipulated market. If you've looked into precious metals and how it's controlled, there's very few other industries out there with that level of manipulation and control by either central banks or whoever, the powers that be, governments that control it. Yet they're the ones that own most of it, and they're the ones controlling the price of it, to the point where they force the producers to not even be in a free market and get free value, or free a dollar value that's applicable to them, where they can actually make a profit. So it's ironic that you have these mining companies that are essentially dictated what price they have to produce their goods or sell their goods at by the same entities that force the price down in the first place. So it's a dichotomy. When that resolves itself, I would almost think the mining companies either just got to close down operation, shut down supply. Then you might get you get a move back towards realistic prices. The end of the manipulation, it won't happen as long as we have central banks and fiat and huge money and political interest controlling precious metals. It'll be, their hands will be tied behind their back, that whole industry.
Yeah, and well, certainly it seems like U.S. government will continue doing its best to get that catalyst here as soon as possible with some of the policies that we have down here. But in either case, will be fascinating to see how it plays out. And again,
Well,
coming on and
I
sharing
got actually
all
one
this.
more little point to make on
Oh,
that,
yeah.
if you don't mind.
Sure.
So if you have precious metals essentially being sold at the cost to produce, really there's no other good out there that you can actually buy at cost
Right.
and own, which still has intrinsic value. So in terms of an opportunity to buy physical metals, right now and continuing forward is probably the best time to be buying the metals because you're at cost. You're buying it at cost.
Yep.
The other thing, and we kind of touched about it in terms of the cannabis market, is for decades and decades, anyone who's operated in the cannabis space, and call it the gray market or whatever, who's flush and sitting on all this cash, two things are going to happen. You're either the government's going to come after that cash one way or another, but if you actually end up converting that cash and you made lots of money and you buy metals with the cannabis cash, you're actually trading that fiat into something that has more intrinsic value that's at cash cost to produce versus fiat currency. So I would almost encourage people that have that kind of cash sitting around, start looking at the precious metals. It's probably one of the best investment opportunities because you're buying everything at cost. And then as we move forward, yeah, I mean, the metals will resurge itself at some point in the future. So yeah, I'm kind of bullish on them, but it would be more, pick away at it slowly. You don't have to dump all your money into it yet.
Yeah, I think it's a great point. In fact, I'd actually been talking about that with a friend who used to be in the cannabis business down here in Denver and wondering, for a lot of these places that do have cash, and certainly with the metals, like you said, at the cost of production, seems like one interesting opportunity. And I guess just last thing, Vin, can you let people know how best they can find you and follow your research? I think you shared a lot of great information, and for folks who want to get in touch, if you could just let them know where to find you at.
Sure. The best way is either through investinmj.com. I'm very active on LinkedIn, so that's probably the best way to connect with me is Vin Maru at LinkedIn on LinkedIn. And if you're interested in business opportunities or exploring more media-related stuff, Golden Tech Media is the website where I manage and I own about 150 cannabis-related websites, some of the best in Canada, and I've started building them out. So that's kind of where I'm focusing a lot of my time is on the media space of this industry.
Great, and that's Vin Maru, and spelled Maru, so you can find him on LinkedIn and those other spots. And again, really appreciate you joining me today. Thank you for all the great information, and we'll look forward to catching up again soon.
Yeah, thank you, Chris. It was a pleasure, and I look forward to talking with you soon.
All right, my friend, you be well.
You too. Take care. Bye.